No secretary survived a week with the millionaire until the stubborn young woman arrived. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew walking into that glass tower would change everything. She just didn't know how much. The elevator climbed 43 floors in complete silence, each passing number reflecting Diana Monroe's growing anxiety in the polished steel doors. Her reflection stared back, dark skin glowing despite the harsh fluorescent lights, intricate braids pulled into a professional bun that had already started to loosen during her rushed subway ride. The navy blazer she'd borrowed from her roommate hung slightly too large on her frame, but it was the best she could manage on 12 hours' notice. Diana clutched the manila folder containing her resume, trying to steady her breathing. The temp agency had called at 6 a.m. with desperation in their voice. "We need someone at Calderon Industries by 9 a.m. The last assistant, well, let's just say she won't be returning." That made 17. 17 secretaries in 8 months. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the executive floor, and Diana stepped into a world that felt more like a museum than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of downtown Chicago, while modern art pieces stood like silent sentinels against pristine white walls. The air itself seemed expensive, clean, filtered, untouched by the chaos of the real world below. "Miss Monroe?" A woman in her 50s approached, her silver hair pulled into a severe chignon. Her smile was polite but carried the weight of someone who had seen too many hopeful faces walk through these doors. "I'm Mrs. Whitfield, Human Resources. Mr. Calderon is ready for you." Diana followed her down a corridor lined with glass conference rooms, each one empty and somehow intimidating. Through the transparent walls, she could see other employees moving with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that noise was not tolerated here. They stopped before massive double doors made of dark mahogany. Mrs. Whitfield's hand hesitated on the handle. "A word of advice, dear," she whispered, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "Don't take anything personally. He's demanding." Before Diana could ask what that meant, the doors opened. The office was a study in controlled perfection. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface clear except for a single laptop and a fountain pen placed at precise right angles. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held leather-bound volumes that looked more decorative than functional. And there, silhouetted against the morning light streaming through the windows, stood a man who seemed carved from marble. Enzo Calderon didn't look up immediately. He finished whatever he was reading on his laptop screen with the methodical focus of someone who had learned that every second held value. When he finally raised his head, Diana felt her breath catch. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with olive skin and dark hair styled with mathematical precision. The sides were freshly shaved, the top slicked back with gel that caught the light. His beard was trimmed in sharp lines that emphasized the strong angles of his jaw, but it was his eyes that stopped her cold, dark brown, almost black, and completely unreadable. "Sit." His voice was low, controlled, with just a hint of an accent that suggested Latin roots buried under years of American business school polish. Diana sat in the leather chair across from his desk, acutely aware of how the silence stretched between them. Enzo's gaze moved over her with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating a piece of equipment. Not cruel exactly, but devoid of warmth. "Diana Monroe," he said, reading from what she assumed was her file. 26. Business Administration from Chicago State. 3 years at Morrison & Associates before they downsized. He looked up. "Why should I believe you'll last longer than a week when 17 others couldn't manage it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Diana felt something shift inside her, a familiar stubbornness that had gotten her through childhood without a father, through college on scholarships and dreams, through jobs that paid just enough to keep her grandmother's medical bills from drowning them both. "Maybe," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "the question isn't why I'll last. Maybe it's why the other 17 couldn't handle working for someone who treats people like disposable coffee cups." The silence that followed was so complete, Diana could hear her own heartbeat. Enzo's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest hint of interest. Mrs. Whitfield cleared her throat nervously from somewhere behind Diana. "Mr. Calderon, perhaps we should leave us." Enzo's command was quiet, but absolute. Diana heard the doors close with a soft click, sealing them alone in that pristine, intimidating space. Enzo leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. For the first time since she'd entered, Diana saw the ghost of something that might have been a smile. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to her. And in that moment, Diana realized she had just crossed a line that 17 others never dared to approach. What she didn't know was that crossing lines with Enzo Calderon was about to become the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. Some people enter your life like a whisper, others like a hurricane wearing mismatched earrings. Diana arrived at Calderon Industries the next morning with a determination that surprised even herself. She'd spent half the night researching the company, memorizing names and departments, and practicing how to work the intimidating coffee machine she'd glimpsed in the executive kitchen. The other half she'd spent wondering if she'd completely lost her mind. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory from their late-night phone call. "Baby girl, sometimes the scariest doors are the ones we need to walk through." The security guard, a kind-faced man named Leon, who looked like he'd seen his share of nervous secretaries, handed her a temporary badge with something resembling sympathy. "Good luck up there, miss," he said, his Chicago accent thick with genuine concern. "That man's got more walls than a maximum security prison." Diana clipped the badge to her cream-colored blouse, one of only 2 professional tops she owned, and headed to the elevator. Today she'd managed to tame her braids into a sleek low bun, and she'd borrowed her roommate's good shoes, the ones that didn't squeak on marble floors. The executive floor hummed with the quiet efficiency of money at work. Diana found her desk, a glass and chrome monument to minimalism, positioned directly outside Enzo's office doors. On its pristine surface sat a single manila folder labeled Protocols in severe block letters. She opened it to find 12 pages of rules. Schedule all meetings in 15-minute increments, no exceptions. Coffee Ethiopian blend, single origin, precisely 185 degrees. Black. Calls are to be screened through 3 levels of priority. Personal calls do not exist. Lunch meetings are scheduled for 12:30 p.m. exactly. 12 minutes allocated for eating. Diana blinked at the list. 12 minutes for lunch? She was still processing this when the office doors opened. Enzo emerged wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Diana's monthly rent. His hair was styled with the same mathematical precision as yesterday, his beard trimmed to architectural perfection. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged in any room he entered. "Ms. Munro." His voice carried no warmth, but also none of yesterday's testing edge. "The Morrison account files need to be digitized by noon. Legal wants the Hartwell contracts reviewed for compliance issues, and I need the quarterly reports from the Seattle office formatted and printed in 15 minutes. He rattled off the tasks while walking past her desk, not bothering to look back. Diana scrambled for a pen, trying to catch everything. "Also," he paused at his office door, "cancel my 3 p.m. with Richardson. Reschedule for Thursday at the same time." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Diana staring at her half-completed notes. 15 minutes for quarterly reports. Noon for Morrison files. The Hartwell contracts. She took a deep breath and got to work. By 10 a.m., Diana had discovered 3 things. The filing system was organized with military precision, the printer had a personality disorder, and Enzo Calderon drank exactly 4 cups of coffee between 9 and 11 a.m., each one requiring a fresh filter and precise timing. She was fighting with the printer, a sleek machine that seemed to sense her frustration and respond by jamming more frequently when disaster struck. Diana reached across the printer to clear a paper jam, her elbow catching the edge of Enzo's coffee cup she'd just prepared. Time slowed as the Ethiopian blend, single origin, precisely 185 degrees, arced through the air in a perfect brown parabola before splashing across the quarterly reports she'd just finished formatting. "No, no, no," Diana whispered, watching coffee seep through 30 pages of financial data. She grabbed tissues, trying to salvage what she could, but the damage was done. The papers looked like they'd been attacked by a caffeinated hurricane. "Is there a problem, Ms. Munro?" Diana's blood turned to ice. Enzo stood in his doorway, taking in the scene with those unreadable dark eyes. Coffee dripped steadily from the desk onto the pristine white carpet. The ruined reports lay scattered like evidence of her incompetence. For a moment, Diana considered lying, making excuses, blaming the printer's temperamental nature or the coffee cup's poor positioning. But something in his steady gaze stripped away her defenses. "I destroyed your quarterly reports," she said simply. "I can have new ones printed in 20 minutes, but I know you needed them in 15, and I know that's not acceptable, and I'm sorry." Enzo studied her for a long moment. Diana braced herself for the explosion, the cold dismissal, the inevitable security will escort you out. Instead, he walked to the supply closet and returned with a roll of paper towels. 20 minutes, he said, handing them to her. Make them 22 minutes and we'll discuss whether sorry is sufficient. He turned back toward his office, then paused. Ms. Munro, next time you prepare my coffee, move the cup to the warming tray immediately. It won't interfere with printer operations from there. Diana stared at the paper towels in her hands, then at Enzo's retreating figure. He hadn't yelled, hadn't fired her, had actually helped. As she cleaned up the coffee disaster, Diana caught herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't that 17 secretaries couldn't handle Enzo Calderon. Maybe the problem was that they'd never tried to understand him. But understanding a man like Enzo Calderon, Diana was about to learn, was far more dangerous than simply surviving him. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is exactly what feels right. By the end of her first week, Diana had developed a rhythm that bordered on the supernatural. She anticipated Enzo's needs before he voiced them, had memorized his preferred vendors, and could navigate the labyrinthine filing system with her eyes closed. More importantly, she had survived 7 full days, a record that hadn't gone unnoticed by the other employees. "I don't know how you do it," whispered Cassidy Walsh, a junior analyst with bright red hair and freckles that made her look younger than her 28 years. They stood in the break room on the 22nd floor, far enough from the executive level to speak freely. Bethany lasted 3 days. The one before her didn't even make it through lunch on day 1. Diana stirred sugar into her coffee. Regular coffee, not the Ethiopian blend that had become her morning ritual of precision. "Maybe I'm just too stubborn to quit. Or maybe," Cassidy lowered her voice conspiratorially, "you're the first one who doesn't take his attitude personally. I heard through the grapevine that he actually said, 'Thank you' yesterday when you stayed late to finish the Brennan proposal." Diana smiled, remembering the moment. It had been barely a whisper, delivered without eye contact as Enzo gathered his briefcase to leave. But it had been genuine. "He's not as impossible as everyone thinks," Diana found herself saying. "He's just careful." Cassidy raised an eyebrow. "Careful. The man fired his last assistant for using blue ink instead of black. That's not careful. That's traumatized," Diana replied, surprising herself with the observation. Where had that come from? She carried that thought back to the executive floor, where she found Enzo's office door closed and voices raised inside. Through the glass walls, she could see him standing rigid behind his desk, facing a woman Diana didn't recognize, tall, blonde, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Diana's car. "Completely unreasonable, Enzo," the woman's voice carried clearly despite the closed door. 3 years we were together and you think you can just— "Vanessa," Enzo's voice was arctic. "We discussed this. It's over." "Because of what?" "Because I wanted more than your schedule allowed. Because I dared to expect actual emotion from you." Diana tried to focus on her computer screen, but the argument was impossible to ignore. Other employees on the floor had found sudden urgent tasks elsewhere, leaving Diana alone to witness whatever was unfolding. "You knew what this was from the beginning," Enzo continued, his tone never rising but somehow growing colder. "I never promised you anything beyond what I gave." "What you gave?" Vanessa's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Expensive dinners with your phone constantly buzzing? Weekend trips where you spent more time on conference calls than talking to me? That's not a relationship, Enzo. That's a business arrangement with better wine." Diana's fingers stilled on her keyboard. Through the glass, she watched Enzo's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, a tell she'd learned to recognize over the past week. "If that's how you felt, you should have ended it sooner," he said. "I kept hoping you'd remember how to be human." Vanessa's voice cracked with frustration. "But you can't, can you? You've built so many walls around yourself that you don't even know where the real Enzo begins anymore." The office fell silent. Diana could see Enzo standing perfectly still, his hands flat on his desk, staring at something beyond Vanessa's shoulder. For a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped, and Diana caught a glimpse of something raw and wounded in his expression. Then the mask snapped back into place. "Mrs. Richardson will validate your parking," he said quietly. "Don't contact me again." Vanessa stared at him for a long moment, her anger transforming into something that looked like pity. "You know what, Enzo? I actually feel sorry for you because someday you're going to meet someone who makes you want to tear down those walls, and you won't remember how." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. As she passed Diana's desk, she paused. Good luck, she said, not unkindly. You're going to need it. Diana watched her disappear into the elevator, then turned back toward Enzo's office. He stood at his window now, his back to the world, hands clasped behind him in a posture that somehow managed to convey both authority and isolation. Without thinking, Diana stood and walked to his door. She knocked softly. "Come in." Enzo didn't turn around when she entered. His reflection in the window looked like a man carrying invisible weight. "The Henderson files are ready for your review," Diana said gently, "and your 2 p.m. called to confirm." "Fine." His voice was steady, professional, empty. Diana hesitated. Every protocol in that manila folder told her to leave, to maintain professional distance, to treat him like a boss, not a person. Instead, she said quietly, "Are you okay?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to find there. Enzo's reflection met her eyes in the window. "I'm always okay, Ms. Monroe." But his voice carried just the faintest crack, like ice beginning to thaw. And Diana realized that sometimes the most dangerous territory isn't the place where walls exist. It's the moment when someone gives you permission to see past them. The most honest conversations happen when the rest of the world has gone home. Diana should have left at 6 p.m. like everyone else, should have gathered her purse, wished Enzo a professional good night, and caught the red line back to her small apartment in Rogers Park. Instead, she found herself still at her desk at 8:30, watching the Chicago skyline transform from day to night through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Enzo's office light was still on. She'd stayed to finish formatting the Morrison contracts, a task that technically could have waited until Monday, but if she was honest with herself, that wasn't the real reason. Something about their earlier exchange had lodged itself under her skin. The crack in his voice when he'd said, "I'm always okay." The way his shoulders had carried tension like armor. Diana's phone buzzed with a text from her roommate Zara. "Working late again? That boss better be paying overtime or looking like Idris Elba." Diana smiled despite herself. If only Zara knew how complicated the answer to that question had become. "Ms. Monroe." Diana looked up to find Enzo standing in his doorway, jacket removed, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that belonged in a magazine. His hair had lost some of its morning precision, a few dark strands falling across his forehead. He looked more human somehow, less untouchable. "I thought you'd left," he said. "Still working on the Morrison files. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for Monday's presentation." Diana saved her document, trying to ignore how different he seemed in the empty office. Less guarded. "What about you? Don't you have a life outside these walls?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Diana winced internally, too personal, too direct. But Enzo didn't seem offended. If anything, he looked almost amused. "Life?" He leaned against his doorframe. "I've heard of the concept. Very funny." Diana stood, stretching muscles that had been hunched over her computer for too long. "When was the last time you left this building before 9 p.m.? Enzo considered this with the same serious attention he gave quarterly projections. "Thursday." "This Thursday? As in yesterday?" "Last Thursday, maybe the one before that." Diana stared at him. "That's not living, that's existing." "Existing pays very well," he replied, but there was no bite to it, just tired resignation. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant hum of the city 43 floors below. Diana found herself studying his face in the soft glow of the desk lamps, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed darker in the dim light, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never noticed before. "I should go," she said finally, reaching for her purse. "Let you get back to your existing." "Diana." Her name on his lips stopped her cold. Not Ms. Monroe. Diana. He'd never used her first name before, and the sound of it in his careful, controlled voice did something strange to her pulse. "Stay," he said quietly. "Please." The word hung in the air between them like a bridge. Diana looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Uncertainty, loneliness, need. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but I'm hungry, and if we're going to work late, I'm ordering food. Real food. Not those sad protein bars you eat at your desk." Enzo's mouth curved into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I don't eat sad protein bars." "Enzo, I've seen you eat the same chocolate-flavored cardboard for lunch 3 days in a row. That's not food, that's punishment." This time he actually did smile. Small, barely there, but real. "What do you suggest?" "There's a Thai place that delivers. Authentic, family-owned, actually has flavor." Diana pulled out her phone. "Do you trust me? With Thai food? I suppose I can risk it." "Good." Sit down, relax. Try to remember what that feels like. Diana called the restaurant while Enzo settled into one of the chairs in front of her desk, a reversal that felt significant somehow. He looked strange sitting there, almost vulnerable without the barrier of his massive mahogany desk between them. 20 minutes, she said, ending the call. Now we wait. I don't wait well, Enzo admitted. I've noticed. You want to tell me why? The question was gentle but direct. Diana had learned that Enzo responded better to honesty than diplomacy. He considered her for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could be trusted with something real. My father, he said finally. He used to make us wait. My mother and me. Dinner would get cold while we sat at the table, waiting for him to come home from work. She'd make excuses. Important meeting, big client, emergency at the office. But really, he just preferred work to us. Diana felt something shift in her chest. How old were you? 8 when it started. 15 when I stopped waiting. Enzo's voice was carefully neutral, but Diana caught the undercurrent of old pain. I swore I'd never be the person making others wait, but instead, you became the person who never stops working. Better than being the person who disappoints people. Diana leaned forward in her chair. Enzo, there's a difference between being reliable and being afraid to live. Before he could respond, Diana's phone buzzed with a call from the lobby. Their food had arrived. But as she went to collect it, Enzo's words echoed in her mind. Better than being the person who disappoints people. When she returned with bags of aromatic Thai food, she found him standing at the windows, looking out at the city lights. His reflection was clearer now in the dark glass, and Diana could see the weight he carried, not just of responsibility, but of old wounds that had never properly healed. Dinner's here, she said softly. He turned, and for just a moment his careful mask was completely gone. In its place was someone younger, more uncertain, more human than Diana had ever imagined possible, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was about to fall for a man who had forgotten how to let himself be loved. Some moments arrive like earthquakes, without warning, changing everything in seconds. Diana had been having the best morning in weeks. The Morrison presentation had gone flawlessly. Enzo had actually complimented her organizational skills in front of the board, and she'd managed to get through her first cup of coffee without spilling it on anything important. Even her hair had cooperated, the braids falling perfectly into the low bun that had become her signature professional look. She was scheduling Enzo's afternoon meetings when her phone rang. Not the office line, her personal cell buzzing insistently from inside her purse. Diana glanced toward Enzo's office door. He was on a conference call with the West Coast team, visible through the glass walls, hands gesturing as he made some point about quarterly projections. The phone kept ringing. Diana checked the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. Mercy General Hospital. With shaking fingers, she answered. Hello? Is this Diana Monroe? The voice was professional, clinical, careful. Yes, this is Diana. Miss Monroe. This is Dr. Patricia Wells from Mercy General. I'm calling about your grandmother, Mrs. Lorraine Monroe. She was brought in an hour ago by ambulance. The world tilted sideways. Diana gripped the edge of her desk, trying to keep her voice steady. What happened? Is she okay? She collapsed at home. A neighbor found her and called 911. We're running tests now, but her condition is serious. She's been asking for you. Diana's vision blurred. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, who had worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper to put Diana through college, who still hummed old gospel songs while braiding Diana's hair, was lying in a hospital bed asking for her. I'll be right there, Diana managed to say. Ms. Monroe, you should know. Given her age and current condition, it would be best if you came quickly. The phone slipped from Diana's fingers, clattering onto her desk. The carefully organized world around her, the pristine office, the scheduled meetings, the importance of quarterly reports, suddenly felt meaningless, surreal. Diana! She looked up to find Enzo standing beside her desk, his conference call apparently finished. His dark eyes moved from her face to the phone lying on her desk, taking in her obvious distress with the quick assessment that made him such a successful businessman. I have to go, Diana said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. She stood on unsteady legs, reaching for her purse. My grandmother, she's in the hospital. I have to... Sit down. Enzo's command was gentle but firm. He guided her back into her chair, his hand steady on her shoulders. Tell me what happened. Diana tried to explain, but the words came out fragmented, broken. Hospital, ambulance, serious condition. Come quickly. The phrases tumbled over each other like puzzle pieces that wouldn't fit together. Enzo listened without interruption, his expression growing more focused with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Which hospital?" he asked. "Mercy General, but Enzo, I know you have the Richardson meeting at 3 and the quarterly review with legal at 4. Forget the meetings." He was already moving, reaching for his jacket. "I'm driving you. You don't understand. You can't just cancel—" "Diana!" He turned back to her, and something in his voice made her stop talking. "The meetings don't matter. Your grandmother does." Before Diana could protest further, Enzo was on his phone with Mrs. Whitfield, rescheduling his entire afternoon with the efficient brutality of someone accustomed to commanding resources. Then he was guiding Diana toward the elevator, his hand warm and steadying at the small of her back. In the underground garage, Diana found herself in the passenger seat of a sleek black BMW, watching Chicago blur past through tear-blurred windows. Enzo drove with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else, but faster than she'd expected, navigating traffic with an urgency that surprised her. "Tell me about her," he said quietly, as they waited at a red light. "What?" Diana wiped her eyes, trying to focus. "Your grandmother. Tell me about her." So Diana did. She talked about Lorraine Monroe, who had been 62 when her son died in a construction accident, leaving behind a 10-year-old granddaughter, who had never remarried, never complained, never let Diana feel like a burden, even when money was tight and the future uncertain. "She used to sing while she worked," Diana said, her voice breaking slightly. "Old church songs, Motown classics, whatever was on the radio. Said music made everything bearable. She sounds remarkable." "She is. She's the strongest person I know." Diana looked at Enzo's profile as he drove, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles were white against the steering wheel. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Leaving work, driving me to the hospital, caring about someone you've never met." Enzo was quiet for so long Diana thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Because no one should have to face something like this alone." They pulled into the hospital parking lot, and Diana felt a fresh wave of panic wash over her. Through the glass doors, she could see the sterile white corridors, the urgent movement of medical staff, the waiting families with worried faces. "What if I'm too late?" she whispered. Enzo turned off the engine and looked at her directly. "Then we'll face that too. But Diana, you're not alone anymore." He reached across the center console and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The gesture was simple, natural, but it sent warmth flooding through Diana's chest. And in that moment she realized that somewhere between Ethiopian coffee and late-night Thai food, between protocol violations and honest conversations, she had stopped thinking of Enzo Calderone as just her boss. The question was, what did that make him now? Sometimes love reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses to stay. The waiting room at Mercy General smelled like disinfectant and fear. Diana sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at the motivational poster on the opposite wall, a sunset over mountains with the words, "Hope is the thing with feathers," scripted across it in gentle cursive. The irony wasn't lost on her. Enzo had been gone for 20 minutes, handling what he'd called arrangements, with the efficiency that both impressed and puzzled her. Diana had been too focused on the doctor's words, "Stable for now, but we need to run more tests," to ask what kind of arrangements required 20 minutes of phone calls in a hospital corridor. Her grandmother was sleeping, finally peaceful after the chaos of the emergency room. The doctors had stabilized her blood pressure and were monitoring her heart, but the words "additional testing" hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. "Diana, honey." Diana looked up to see a familiar face. Mrs. Chen, her grandmother's neighbor, approaching with worry etched in every line of her 70-year-old features. She was still wearing her housework clothes, her grey hair pulled back in the same practical bun Diana remembered from childhood. "Mrs. Chen." Diana stood, accepting the older woman's fierce hug. "Thank you for calling the ambulance. If you hadn't found her—" "Hush now. That's what neighbors do." Mrs. Chen pulled back, studying Diana's face with the intensity of someone who had known her since she was 10. "You look tired, baby. When's the last time you ate?" I don't remember." Before Mrs. Chen could launch into what Diana recognized as an impending lecture about proper nutrition, Enzo reappeared. He moved through the waiting room with purpose, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a small bag from the hospital cafeteria. "Mrs. Chen, this is my—" Diana hesitated. What was Enzo exactly? Boss seemed inadequate. Friend felt presumptuous. This is Enzo Calderon. Enzo, this is Mrs. Chen, my grandmother's neighbor. Mrs. Chen's shrewd eyes took in Enzo's expensive suit, his confident posture, the way he handed Diana coffee without being asked. You're the one who drove her here. Yes, ma'am. Good. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. A man who shows up when it matters. That's worth something. Most of them these days. They disappear when things get difficult. Diana felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mrs. Chen, it's not like that. I know what I see, honey. Mrs. Chen patted Diana's arm with the smugness of someone who had been observing human nature for 7 decades. I need to get back. Left my casserole in the oven. But you call me if you need anything. You hear anything at all? After Mrs. Chen left with another round of fierce hugs, Diana found herself alone with Enzo again. The silence between them felt different now, charged with unspoken questions and the weight of the day's revelations. What kind of arrangements? Diana asked, settling back into her chair. I had my assistant contact the hospital's billing department. Your grandmother's medical expenses will be handled. Diana nearly choked on her coffee. What? Enzo, no. You can't just... It's done. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he'd simply ordered office supplies rather than potentially assuming thousands of dollars in medical bills. I can't let you do that. I don't need your charity. It's not charity. Enzo turned to face her fully, his dark eyes serious. It's what people do for each other when it matters. People? Enzo, we barely know each other outside of work schedules and coffee preferences. Do we? He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Because I know you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I know you always eat lunch at your desk because you're saving money. I know you take evening classes at the community college, even though you're exhausted because you're working toward your master's degree. I know you send half your paycheck to cover your grandmother's prescriptions. Diana stared at him. How do you... Because I pay attention. His voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. And because in 3 weeks you've shown me more kindness than most people have in 3 years. Before Diana could respond, Dr. Wells appeared in the doorway. She was a petite woman with kind eyes and the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to delivering news, both good and bad. Ms. Monroe, your grandmother is awake and asking for you. Her vitals are stable, but we do need to discuss the test results. Diana's stomach clenched. Is it serious? Let's go see her first. She's been worried about you. They followed Dr. Wells down the sterile corridor, past rooms filled with the quiet drama of human illness and recovery. Diana's heart hammered against her ribs with each step. Room 314 was small but bright, filled with afternoon sunlight that made the medical equipment seem less intimidating. And there, propped up against white pillows that made her dark skin look fragile, was Lorraine Monroe. There's my girl, her grandmother said, her voice weaker than Diana remembered, but still carrying that familiar warmth that had been Diana's anchor for 16 years. Diana rushed to her side, taking her grandmother's hand, smaller now, more delicate, but still strong enough to squeeze back. Grandma, you scared me to death. I'm tougher than I look, baby. Takes more than a little heart flutter to keep me down. Lorraine's eyes moved past Diana to where Enzo stood respectfully near the door. And who's this handsome young man? This is Enzo, my... Diana glanced back at him, finding him watching the interaction with something that looked like longing. My friend. Lorraine's eyes, still sharp despite her condition, moved between Diana and Enzo with the assessment of a woman who had seen enough of life to recognize something significant when it walked into her granddaughter's world. Well, friend Enzo, she said with a slight smile, thank you for taking care of my Diana. She's got a habit of taking care of everyone else and forgetting about herself. Dr. Wells cleared her throat gently. Mrs. Monroe, we need to discuss your test results. The good news is that this wasn't a heart attack. However, we did find some irregularities that we need to monitor closely. As the doctor explained the medical details, arrhythmia, medication adjustments, lifestyle changes, Diana felt Enzo move closer, his presence solid and reassuring behind her chair. And she realized that somewhere in the space between crisis and comfort, between fear and relief, something fundamental had shifted between them. The question was whether they were brave enough to acknowledge it. The moment you realize you're falling is also the moment you have to choose whether to fight it or surrender. Diana had been back at work for 3 days, but the office felt different now. Every interaction with Enzo carried an undercurrent she couldn't name. Conversations that lasted a few seconds longer than necessary, glances that lingered when he thought she wasn't looking, a careful awareness of each other's presence that hummed in the air between them like electricity. Her grandmother was home now, resting comfortably with new medications and strict instructions to take things easy. The crisis had passed, but something else had begun in its place. "You're distracted," Cassidy observed, perching on the edge of Diana's desk during their afternoon coffee break, "and you keep looking at his office like you're trying to solve a puzzle." Diana glanced toward Enzo's glass-walled office, where he sat in conference with two men in expensive suits, potential investors, judging by their serious expressions and the stack of financial documents spread across his desk. "I'm not distracted," Diana lied. "I'm just processing." "Processing what?" "The fact that your impossibly demanding boss dropped everything to drive you to the hospital and paid your grandmother's medical bills." Diana nearly choked on her coffee. "How did you—" "Hospital billing called to confirm the account information. I answered your phone." Cassidy's green eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Diana, honey, men like Enzo Calderon don't do things like that for their secretaries. They send flowers and a card. Maybe a fruit basket if they're feeling generous." It's not." Diana struggled to find words for something she didn't understand herself. "It's complicated. The best things usually are." Before Diana could respond, her phone rang. Enzo's extension. "Ms. Monroe, could you come in here please and bring the Patterson contract files?" Diana gathered the requested documents, acutely aware of Cassidy's knowing smile as she walked toward Enzo's office. She knocked once before entering, finding the two investors studying her with the assessing gaze of men who were used to evaluating assets. "Gentlemen, this is Diana Monroe, my executive assistant," Enzo said without looking up from the documents. "Diana, Mr. Blackstone and Mr. Fuller from Highland Capital." Diana shook hands with both men, noting how Enzo's introduction had elevated her title. Executive assistant, not secretary. The distinction mattered in rooms like this. "Ms. Monroe," Mr. Blackstone, the older of the two, smiled at her with practiced charm. "Enzo speaks very highly of your organizational skills. He says you've revolutionized his efficiency." "I just do my job," Diana replied modestly, but she caught Enzo's slight smile from the corner of her eye. "Well, we won't keep you," Mr. Fuller interjected, clearly eager to return to business. "We were just discussing the timeline for the Henderson acquisition." Diana placed the Patterson files on Enzo's desk and turned to leave, but Blackstone's voice stopped her. "Actually, Enzo, before we continue, I have to ask, the rumor mill suggests you've been different lately, more flexible. Word is you actually left a board meeting last week for a personal matter." He chuckled as if the idea were absurd. "People are starting to think you're going soft." Diana felt the tension in the room shift immediately. Enzo's expression didn't change, but she could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his hands stilled on the documents. "My personal decisions don't affect my business judgment," Enzo replied evenly. "Of course not," Fuller agreed quickly. "But perception matters in this business. Highland Capital invests in leadership that's focused, disciplined, uncompromising. We can't afford to partner with someone who's—" he searched for the right word— distracted. Diana felt heat rise in her chest. The implication was clear. Caring about people made Enzo weak. Showing humanity was a liability. "I understand your concerns," Enzo said, his voice taking on the cold formality Diana recognized from his early days. "Let me assure you that my commitment to this company and its growth remains absolute." "Excellent," Blackstone smiled, satisfied. "Because frankly, the Enzo Calderon we've heard about, the one who puts business above everything else, that's exactly the kind of partner we're looking for." Diana stood frozen by the door, watching Enzo's face close off like shutters slamming shut. The man who had held her hand in the hospital parking lot was disappearing behind the mask of the ruthless businessman these investors wanted to see. "Diana," Enzo's voice was arctic now, "please reschedule my afternoon meetings. Mr. Blackstone and Mr. Fuller will need my undivided attention." It was a dismissal, clean and professional, but Diana heard something else in it, a retreat, a return to the safety of walls she'd helped him lower. She nodded and left the office, but not before catching the satisfied expressions on the investors' faces. They had gotten what they wanted, the cold, calculating Enzo Calderon they could trust with their money. An hour later, Diana watched through the glass walls as Enzo shook hands with the two men, sealing whatever deal they had discussed. When they left, he stood at his window for a long moment, hands clasped behind his back in that familiar posture of isolation. Diana knocked on his door. "Come in." She entered to find him still facing the window, his reflection ghost-like in the afternoon light. "The Morrison contracts are ready for your signature," she said quietly. "Leave them on my desk." His voice was different, empty of the warmth that had crept in over the past few weeks. Diana set the contracts down, but instead of leaving, she found herself speaking. "They're wrong, you know." Enzo turned slightly, not quite looking at her. "Excuse me, those men, they're wrong about what makes a good leader." Diana took a step closer, her heart hammering. "Caring about people doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Human doesn't close deals, Ms. Monroe." The formal address hit her like a slap. "So we're back to that. We never left it." But his voice lacked conviction. Diana studied his profile, seeing the tension in his jaw, the careful way he held himself apart. "You're scared. I'm realistic. You're terrified that if you let people see who you really are, the man who drops everything for someone in crisis, who pays hospital bills without being asked, who remembers how someone takes their coffee, they'll think you're weak." Enzo finally turned to face her fully, his dark eyes guarded. "And what if they do? Then they're not worth your time." Diana took another step closer, close enough to see the conflict playing out behind his careful mask. "Enzo, the last 3 weeks, the conversations, the kindness, the way you've let me see past all this," she gestured at his perfectly appointed office. "That's not weakness, that's courage." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Enzo glanced at it, then back at Diana. "I have a conference call with Tokyo in 5 minutes, he said quietly. Diana nodded, understanding the dismissal, but as she reached the door, she turned back. "For what it's worth, I like the real Enzo better than the one those investors want to do business with." And as she left him standing there alone in his perfect empty office, Diana wondered if she had just lost the man she was falling in love with to the expectations of people who would never know his worth. Sometimes the loudest truths are spoken in whispers, and the most important conversations happen when we think no one is listening. 2 weeks had passed since the investor's visit, and the distance between Diana and Enzo had grown like a chasm neither seemed willing to cross. He had retreated so completely behind his professional mask that Diana sometimes wondered if she had imagined those moments of connection, the hand-holding in the hospital parking lot, the late-night conversations over Thai food, the way he had looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Now their interactions were crisp, efficient, painfully polite. He was Mr. Calderon again, and she was Ms. Monroe, and the warmth that had been building between them felt like a dream from someone else's life. Diana tried to tell herself it was better this way, cleaner, less complicated, but her heart wasn't buying it. She was working late again, a habit that had become more frequent, since their relationship had reverted to purely professional. The office was empty, except for the security guard making his rounds and the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Diana had volunteered to stay and finish the quarterly compliance reports, partly because they needed to be done, but mostly because her small apartment felt too quiet, too full of thoughts she didn't want to examine. She was deep in spreadsheets when she heard Enzo's voice, low and tense, coming from his office. The door was partially open, and sound carried easily in the empty building. "No, Mother, I understand what you're saying, but—" Diana tried not to listen, but something in his tone made her hands still on her keyboard. She had never heard him sound like that, younger somehow, frustrated in a way that had nothing to do with business. "I know what Father would have wanted," Enzo continued, his voice rising slightly. "Believe me, I've heard that particular lecture for 35 years. Silence. Then, "You're right. I have been different lately." "Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing." More silence. Diana could picture him standing at his window, shoulders rigid with the weight of whatever conversation was unfolding. "Her name is Diana." His voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. "And before you ask, no, she's not like Vanessa. She's not like anyone I've ever met." Diana's breath caught. He was talking about her, to his mother. "She makes me want to be better than Father ever was. Better than the man you married who chose deals over dinner, contracts over Christmas morning, success over everything else that matters." Diana found herself leaning forward, straining to catch every word. "I know you think sentiment is a luxury we can't afford," Enzo continued, his voice growing stronger. "But what if you're wrong? What if everything Father taught us about business and life and what matters was just his way of avoiding the risk of actually caring about someone?" The silence stretched long enough that Diana wondered if the call had ended. Then Enzo spoke again, so quietly she almost missed it. "I think I'm in love with her, Mother, and for the first time in my life, I'm more terrified of losing that than I am of losing a business deal." Diana's heart stopped, then started again, faster than before. No, I haven't told her, because I'm a coward who spent so many years building walls that I've forgotten how to tear them down. A pause. I know Father would say it's a distraction, but maybe Father was wrong about a lot of things. Diana heard the soft click of him ending the call, followed by what sounded like him sinking into his chair. She sat frozen at her desk, her mind reeling. Enzo was in love with her. He had just told his mother that he loved her, but he was also convinced he was a coward who couldn't tell her. Without giving herself time to think about it, to analyze the risks or consequences, Diana stood and walked to his office door. She knocked softly. "Come in." She pushed the door open to find Enzo sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. He looked up when she entered, and Diana saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Raw honesty, stripped of all pretense. "Diana," he straightened, trying to reassemble his professional mask, but it was too late. She had seen behind it. "I heard," she said simply. The words hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to find there. Enzo went very still. "How much?" "Enough." Diana took a step into the office, then another. "Enough to know that you're not the coward you think you are. Aren't I?" His laugh was bitter. "I've spent weeks pretending nothing changed between us, treating you like just another employee when you're—" He stopped, shaking his head. "When I'm what?" Diana moved closer, close enough to see the conflict playing out in his dark eyes. "When you're the person who made me remember what it feels like to be human," he said quietly. "When you're the woman I think about first thing in the morning and last thing at night. When you're the one who makes me want to be brave enough to choose love over fear." Diana felt tears she hadn't expected pricking at her eyes. "Enzo, I love you." The words came out in a rush as if he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "I love your stubbornness and your kindness and the way you hum when you think no one's listening. I love that you see people, really see them, instead of just what they can do for you. I love that you made me want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." He stood, moving around his desk until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she could see the vulnerability he was finally allowing her to witness. "But I also love you enough to know that you deserve better than someone who's spent weeks hiding behind business meetings and investor expectations because he was too scared to admit how he felt." Diana reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the slight roughness of his beard against her palms. "You want to know what I think?" she said softly. "More than anything. I think you're exactly brave enough, because it takes courage to let someone see your fears. It takes strength to admit when you're wrong, and it takes a special kind of man to choose love even when it terrifies him." Enzo's eyes searched her face. "Diana, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you too, you impossible, beautiful, complicated man. I love your precision and your passion, and the way you pretend not to care when you care more deeply than anyone I've ever known." And in that moment, surrounded by the trappings of corporate success, they both realized that the most important deal they would ever make was the one where they chose each other. Love isn't just about finding someone worth fighting for, it's about becoming someone worth fighting with. Diana had never imagined that falling in love could feel so much like standing on the edge of a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. The 3 days since their confession had been a whirlwind of stolen moments between meetings, hands brushing as they passed documents, and conversations that carried layers of meaning beneath their professional surface. But she could see the war playing out behind Enzo's eyes. Love and fear, hope and habit, battling for control of a man who had spent decades believing that caring too much was a luxury he couldn't afford. The crisis came on a Thursday morning in the form of a phone call that would change everything. Diana was reviewing the morning's schedule when Mrs. Whitfield appeared at her desk, her usually composed expression tight with concern. "Diana, dear, Mr. Calderon needs to see you immediately. And," she hesitated, "Mr. Blackstone from Highland Capital is with him." Diana's stomach dropped. The investor who had made it clear that soft leadership was unacceptable. She gathered her notebook and walked toward Enzo's office, noting the tension radiating from behind the glass walls. Inside, she found Enzo standing rigidly behind his desk, while Blackstone occupied one of the leather chairs, with the casual authority of someone delivering an ultimatum. A third man, younger, sharper, with calculating eyes, sat beside him, taking notes. "Ah, Ms. Munro." Blackstone's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Perfect timing. Please, sit down." Diana remained standing, sensing that whatever was about to happen required her to be ready to move. Enzo's eyes met hers for just a moment, and she saw something there that made her heart race. Not fear, but determination. "Ms. Monroe," Blackstone continued, "we've been conducting our due diligence on Mr. Calderon's leadership style, and some concerns have come to light." "Concerns?" Diana kept her voice level, professional. "Reports of favoritism, unprofessional relationships, a CEO who's allowed personal feelings to cloud his business judgment." Blackstone's eyes moved between Diana and Enzo, like a predator who had scented weakness. "Specifically, reports of an inappropriate relationship between you and Mr. Calderon." Diana felt the blood drain from her face. Beside Blackstone, the younger man, his assistant presumably, was recording every word. "I'm afraid Highland Capital can't invest in a company where the leadership has such blurred boundaries," Blackstone continued. "However, we're prepared to move forward with our original offer under one condition." The silence in the room was deafening. Ms. Monroe's immediate termination, clean break, generous severance, excellent references, no hard feelings, of course, just business. Diana's vision narrowed. They wanted Enzo to choose the biggest deal of his career or her. Love or money, heart or ambition. She looked at Enzo, standing statue still behind his desk. His face was perfectly composed, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip of his hands on the mahogany surface. "That's quite an ultimatum, Mr. Blackstone," Enzo said quietly. "Not an ultimatum, a business decision. You can have Highland Capital's investment and the expansion opportunities that come with it, or you can have your personal complications. But you can't have both." Diana felt something break inside her chest, because she knew what Enzo would choose. Had to choose. Highland Capital represented everything he had worked for. International expansion, unlimited growth potential, the kind of success his father had never achieved. She thought about her grandmother's medical bills, already paid because of Enzo's generosity. Her own uncertain future. The reality that she was one person against an empire of opportunity. "You know what?" Diana said, her voice stronger than she felt. "You're right." Both men looked at her in surprise. Enzo's eyes widened. "Professional boundaries are important," Diana continued, each word carefully measured. "And I wouldn't want to be the reason Mr. Calderon's company missed out on such a significant opportunity." "Diana!" Enzo's voice was sharp with warning. "It's fine," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I understand business. This is business." But as she said the words, Diana saw something shift in Enzo's expression. The careful calculation fell away, replaced by something that looked like fury. "No," he said quietly. Blackstone frowned. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Enzo moved around his desk, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You want me to fire the most competent, dedicated, intelligent person I've ever worked with because you're uncomfortable with the idea that I might actually care about someone." "Mr. Calderon," Blackstone's voice carried a warning, "I think you should consider very carefully." "I am considering carefully," Enzo interrupted. "I'm considering that Highland Capital wants to invest in a version of me that no longer exists. The man you're looking for, the one who puts profit above people, success above everything else. He was my father, and he died alone in an office very much like this one, surrounded by contracts and quarterly reports and business associates who disappeared the moment he was no longer useful to them." Diana felt tears pricking at her eyes as she watched Enzo finally, fully choose who he wanted to be. "Diana Monroe isn't a complication or a distraction," he continued, his voice ringing with conviction. "She's the reason I remember what I'm working for. She makes me a better leader, a better businessman, and a better man. And if you can't see that, if you think caring about people makes me weak, then Highland Capital isn't the kind of partner I want." Blackstone's face had gone red with anger. "You're making a serious mistake, Calderon. We're offering you everything you've worked for." "No," Enzo said, moving to stand beside Diana. "You're offering me everything my father worked for. What I'm working for is something entirely different." He took Diana's hand, intertwining their fingers in full view of the investors and their recording assistant. "What I'm working for is a company built on the idea that success doesn't require you to sacrifice your humanity. That caring about people, your employees, your community, your family, makes you stronger, not weaker." Blackstone stood, his assistant scrambling to follow. "This is your final decision?" "It is." "Then Highland Capital withdraws our offer. Permanently." "Understood." After the two men left, the office fell into silence. Diana turned to look at Enzo, hardly believing what had just happened. You just walked away from $50 million, she said quietly. I walked away from $50 million that came with strings I wasn't willing to accept. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Diana, you are worth more than any deal, any investment, any amount of money they could offer. But your company will survive, will thrive, because it's built on something more sustainable than fear and isolation. He smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes completely. Besides, I have someone on my team who revolutionizes efficiency and makes the impossible seem manageable. Diana laughed through her tears. Is that a job offer, Mr. Calderon? It's everything, Ms. Monroe. It's a job offer, a partnership proposal, and a promise that from now on we build something together that's worth more than money. And as they stood there in the aftermath of the choice that would define both their futures, Diana realized that sometimes the most important victories are the ones where you win by refusing to play the game. Some love stories end with a kiss in the rain. Others end with the courage to build something beautiful together, one honest moment at a time. 3 months had passed since the Highland Capital ultimatum, and Calderon Industries had not only survived Enzo's decision, it had flourished. Word had spread through Chicago's business community about the CEO who had chosen principle over profit, and suddenly everyone wanted to work with the company that prioritized people alongside performance. Diana stood in what used to be the sterile conference room on the 40th floor, watching as workers installed warm wood paneling and comfortable seating. The space was being transformed into an employee wellness center, complete with a meditation room, a nursing station for new mothers, and a small library where people could decompress during breaks. "It's beautiful," said a familiar voice behind her. Diana turned to find her grandmother Lorraine standing in the doorway. She was using an elegant walking cane now, a concession to her condition that she wore with the dignity of a queen holding a scepter. Her health had stabilized beautifully over the past months, and she seemed to grow stronger each day. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" Diana hugged her carefully, still protective of her health, even though the doctors had given increasingly positive reports. "That young man of yours invited me for lunch, said he had something important to discuss." Lorraine's eyes sparkled with the mischief Diana remembered from childhood. Something about wanting to do things properly. Diana's heart skipped. Properly. Before Lorraine could answer, Enzo appeared in the doorway wearing a navy suit that made his dark eyes look almost black. But what struck Diana most was his expression, nervous, hopeful, radiating the kind of vulnerability that still amazed her after all these months. "Mrs. Monroe," he greeted Diana's grandmother with the respectful warmth that had won her over completely during their weekly dinners. "Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it for the world, son. Though I have to say, all this secrecy has my granddaughter looking like she's about to jump out of her skin." Enzo smiled, but Diana could see the tension in his shoulders. Whatever this was about, it mattered to him, deeply. "Diana," he said, his voice carrying that formal tone he only used when he was trying to control his emotions. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Diana followed him out onto the building's rooftop garden, another addition from the past months, where employees could eat lunch surrounded by flowers and the Chicago skyline. It was early evening now, and the city spread out before them like a carpet of lights beginning to twinkle in the growing dusk. "You're nervous," Diana observed, studying his profile as he stared out at the view. "Terrified," he corrected, "which should probably concern me more than it does." "Enzo, what's going on? You're making me nervous too." He turned to face her fully, and Diana saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Love, yes, but also determination, purpose, the look of a man who had made a decision and was ready to see it through. "Diana, 3 months ago you asked me what kind of man I wanted to be. Do you remember? In the hospital," she said softly. "When you were afraid to care because you thought it made you weak. You changed everything for me," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "Not just because you made me fall in love, though you did that completely and irrevocably, but because you showed me that strength isn't about building walls. It's about being brave enough to let them down." Diana felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Enzo, I've spent my whole life thinking that love was a luxury I couldn't afford. That caring too much would make me vulnerable, weak, distracted. But you taught me that love doesn't make you weaker. It makes you fight harder for what matters." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Diana's heart stop entirely. "I want to build something with you, Diana. Not just a business or a career or a comfortable life. I want to build a love story that's worth telling. A partnership that makes both of us braver, kinder, more ourselves than we ever thought possible." He dropped to one knee right there on the rooftop, with the city of Chicago as their witness and the first stars beginning to appear in the sky above them. "Diana Monroe, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. You see people, really see them, when everyone else just sees what they can do for you. You have the kind of strength that comes from surviving hardship without losing your softness, the kind of intelligence that solves problems other people don't even notice, and the kind of heart that makes everyone around you want to be better." Diana was crying now, but she didn't care. Through her tears, she could see Enzo's hands shaking slightly as he opened the box to reveal a ring that was absolutely perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, classic but uniquely hers. "You taught me that the best business decisions aren't always the safest ones, that sometimes you have to risk everything for something that matters more than money or success or other people's approval. You are what matters more, Diana. You are worth every risk, every sacrifice, every brave choice I'll ever make." His voice broke slightly on the next words. "Will you marry me? Will you help me build something beautiful and honest and real? Will you teach me every day what it means to love someone more than I love being safe?" Through her tears, Diana could see her grandmother watching from the doorway, her hand pressed to her heart. Beyond her, she could see other employees who had gathered to witness this moment, their faces bright with joy and anticipation. But mostly she saw Enzo, the man who had started as her intimidating boss and become her partner, her best friend, her heart. The man who had chosen love over fear, again and again, until choosing love became as natural as breathing. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." Enzo's face transformed with relief and joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When he stood and kissed her, Diana could hear cheering from their audience, but all she could focus on was the way he held her, like she was precious, like she was home, like she was exactly where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing through tears, Enzo rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you with everything I am and everything I'm still becoming." "I love you too," Diana replied. "All of you. The businessman and the dreamer, the careful planner and the man who's learning to take beautiful risks." As the Chicago skyline glittered around them and their friends and family celebrated their happiness, Diana realized that this was what real love looked like. Not perfect, but honest. Not easy, but worth it. Not a fairy tale ending, but a beautiful beginning. Because the best love stories aren't about finding your other half. They're about becoming whole enough to build something extraordinary together. What would you have done in Diana's place? Would you have had the courage to love someone who scared you as much as he inspired you? 2 years later, the most beautiful endings are really just the beginning of something even more extraordinary. Diana Calderon stood in the nursery of their Lincoln Park home, gently rocking their 3-month-old daughter Isabella, while watching the Chicago sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The baby's dark hair caught the morning light, and her eyes, so much like her father's, gazed up at Diana with the solemn intensity that all newborns seem to possess. "Good morning, little love," Diana whispered, pressing a soft kiss to Isabella's forehead. "Ready to meet the world today?" From the doorway came a familiar voice, warm with sleep and contentment. "She's been awake for 20 minutes. I could hear her little sounds through the monitor." Diana turned to find Enzo leaning against the doorframe, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing the simple grey t-shirt and pajama pants that had become his weekend uniform. 2 years of marriage had softened some of his sharp edges, not made him weak, but made him more human, more himself. "Your daughter has your scheduling tendencies," Diana said with a smile. "Up at exactly 6 a.m. every day, no matter what." "My daughter." Enzo moved into the room, his bare feet silent on the soft carpet. "When she's being punctual, she's my daughter. When she's refusing to nap and charming everyone within a 5-mile radius, she's yours." He reached for Isabella, and Diana watched the transformation that still amazed her, the way Enzo's entire being softened when he held their daughter. The powerful businessman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals became simply a father, completely enchanted by the tiny person in his arms. "How did you sleep?" he asked Diana, studying her face with the attentiveness that had never dimmed in all their time together. "Better than expected for someone who got up twice for feedings." Diana stretched, working out the gentle aches of new motherhood. "Your mother called yesterday while you were in meetings. She's arriving Thursday for her monthly grandmother visit." Enzo smiled, His relationship with his mother had healed considerably over the past 2 years, another gift that had come from learning to prioritize love over fear. Elena Calderon had initially been skeptical of Diana, but watching her son bloom into the man he was meant to be had won her over completely. "She's bringing her famous empanadas," Diana continued, "and probably enough baby clothes to outfit triplets. She's making up for lost time," Enzo said softly, bouncing Isabella gently, "trying to be the grandmother she never knew how to be when I was growing up." From downstairs came the sound of the front door opening, followed by a familiar voice calling out, "Where's my great-grandbaby?" Diana laughed. "And there's Grandma Lorraine right on schedule." Lorraine had made remarkable progress over the past 2 years. The combination of excellent medical care, reduced stress about finances, and the joy of watching Diana build a beautiful life had given her a vitality that amazed her doctors. She had moved into a comfortable apartment just 10 minutes away, where she held court like a benevolent queen, dispensing wisdom and homemade cookies to anyone who needed them. "Up here, Grandma," Diana called. They could hear Lorraine's careful steps on the stairs. She still used her elegant cane, but more for style than necessity these days. When she appeared in the nursery doorway, her face lit up with the pure joy that had become her trademark expression since Isabella's arrival. "There's my beautiful girl," she said, reaching for the baby. "Come to Grandma, sweet pea." Enzo handed Isabella over with the gentle care he brought to everything precious, and Diana watched 3 generations of strong women together, her grandmother, herself, and her daughter, the continuity of love passing from one to the next. "How's the company doing?" Lorraine asked as they made their way downstairs to the kitchen, where the morning routine would unfold with the comfortable rhythm they had developed. "Better than ever," Diana replied, starting the coffee maker, still Ethiopian blend, but now shared between 2 people who had learned that the best mornings were the ones you didn't have to face alone. "The employee satisfaction scores are the highest in our industry. Productivity is up 18%, and we just signed 3 new clients who specifically chose us because of our company culture. Turns out treating people like human beings instead of profit centers is actually good for business," Enzo added, with the satisfaction of someone who had proven all the skeptics wrong. Who would have thought? The past 2 years had vindicated every choice they had made. Calderon Industries had become a case study in progressive leadership, featured in business magazines and MBA programs as proof that companies could be both profitable and humane. Enzo's speaking engagements were booked months in advance, and Diana had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, a position she had earned through competence, vision, and the unique ability to translate Enzo's ambitious ideas into practical realities. But more than professional success, they had built something sustainable, a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values, a home filled with laughter and honest conversation, a life that prioritized what mattered most. "I have to go in for a few hours this afternoon," Enzo said, preparing Isabella's bottle with the practiced efficiency of a devoted father. "The Seattle team is presenting their quarterly results, and I promised to be there virtually." "On a Saturday?" Lorraine raised an eyebrow. "Baby, didn't you learn anything about work-life balance?" Diana smiled. "He learned plenty, Grandma. The Seattle presentation is important to the team, and Enzo wants to show support. But he'll be home by 3 for Isabella's bath time because that's non-negotiable." "Exactly," Enzo confirmed, testing the bottle temperature on his wrist. "I learned the difference between working because you're afraid to stop and working because you care about something bigger than yourself." As if summoned by the mention of bath time, Isabella began to fuss softly. Diana took her back, settling into the comfortable routine of feeding, while Enzo prepared breakfast and Lorraine regaled them with stories from her week, bridge games with the neighbors, her book club's heated discussion about their latest romance novel, the progress of her small garden on her apartment balcony. This was their life now, not perfect, but real, built on a foundation of love that had been tested and proven strong enough to support dreams, challenges, and the beautiful, ordinary moments that made up a shared existence. Later that afternoon, Diana stood at the kitchen window washing dishes, while Isabella napped and Enzo finished his virtual meeting upstairs. Through the glass she could see their small backyard garden, another of Enzo's surprising talents that had emerged once he allowed himself time for things beyond business. Tomatoes and herbs grew in neat rows, tended with the same precision he brought to everything he cared about. Her wedding ring caught the light as she worked, and Diana found herself thinking about the woman she had been 2 years ago, uncertain, struggling, carrying the weight of her grandmother's medical bills and her own uncertain future. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this sense of belonging somewhere completely. "What are you thinking about?" Enzo asked, appearing behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just this," Diana said, leaning back against his chest. "How far we've come, how different everything is." "Different how?" Diana considered the question, watching the afternoon light play across their garden. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people, that I was meant to work hard, take care of others, and hope for small moments of joy in between the struggles." Enzo's arms tightened around her. "And now? Now I know that happiness isn't something you wait for, or something you luck into. It's something you build choice by choice, day by day, with someone who's willing to build it with you." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep in her bouncer, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood coming alive with weekend activities, families walking dogs, children playing in yards, the gentle hum of lives being lived with intention and care. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Highland Capital had offered the deal without the ultimatum?" Diana asked. "Never," Enzo replied without hesitation, "because I know exactly what would have happened. I would have taken their money, expanded the company, and probably been successful by every external measure. But I would have been miserable, and more importantly, I would have missed this, all of this." He turned her in his arms so she was facing him, his dark eyes serious but peaceful. "Diana, you didn't just save me from making a terrible business decision. You saved me from living a life that would have left me empty no matter how much money I made or how many deals I closed." From upstairs came the soft sound of Isabella stirring from her nap, ready for attention, and the evening routine that would carry them through to another peaceful night. "Our daughter's awake," Diana said with a smile. "She is," Enzo agreed, "ready for whatever comes next." And as they went upstairs together to welcome their daughter into another evening of love, laughter, and the beautiful ordinary magic of a life built on choosing each other every single day, Diana realized that some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They evolve into happily ever after all. Because the most extraordinary love isn't the kind that conquers all. It's the kind that grows stronger, deeper, and more beautiful with each passing day, built on the foundation of two people who never stop choosing to be brave enough for love. Sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones that remind us that we all deserve someone who sees our worth and chooses us, not despite our imperfections, but because of the beautiful, complicated, extraordinary humans we are. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.